Hello, everyone. So we are getting to the last few weeks of studying, and it is time to memorize. And so we wanted to share some of our knowledge here at International Bar Mentors, which helped myself achieve a 303 on the uniform bar exam, and our co-founder, Hina Naveed, a 338. We believe that being able to memorize efficiently played a critical part in arriving at that score. So here go some tips. The first one is start early. So 2 weeks for memorizing should be the bare minimum that you spend to memorize. If you can, start earlier. Starting earlier doesn't mean that you have to do a deep dive into memorizing, but you should at least start with the commonly tested topics within each subject. You should try to do that at least more than 2 weeks prior to when you're actually taking the bar exam. As you start using your study materials to memorize, highlight the key elements of the rule. This is going to reduce the amount of words that you have to focus your attention on memorizing, and it really becomes critical and it makes it less information to crunch. So an example of this would be the rule for Miranda. So the rule for Miranda is a person is entitled to Miranda rights when they are subject to custodial interrogation. The key operating words there for that basic definition of Miranda is custodial interrogation. So those are the two words that you can't go without and actually have a rule which you're going to get points for. So there you would highlight in your study materials custodial interrogation. Now, obviously, both of those, custody and interrogation, have definitions, and you want to highlight the basic elements of those as well. But the idea behind this is as you go through the crunch, what you're going to focus on is just the basic words of what can my rule not go without. Okay, that will reduce the amount of information that you need to memorize. Another tip is to try to associate the rules to facts that you've encountered when the rule was tested in the past. So for example, I did a civil procedure essay which tested personal jurisdiction, more specifically traditional basis. So under traditional basis, the way that a court can take jurisdiction is under consent, domicile, or physical presence. This specific essay was testing physical presence. Now, in order for the court to get personal jurisdiction under physical presence, it's essentially the defendant has to be voluntarily physically present in the forum state, and they have to be personally served with process. So the key words there be physically present and personally served, right? Those are the key terms of the physical presence rule for traditional basis personal jurisdiction. So I remember that in this essay, essentially a man was on business in state C. And for anyone who wants to try this essay, it's July 2016, the civil procedure essay. The man was there on business for the day, and he was the defendant in a case. A woman was the plaintiff. The woman's attorney handed him the lawsuit when he happened to be in the state on business for the day. So what do? I go to my outline by physical presence under personal jurisdiction, traditional basis. I just put in quotes, man on business, right? Man on the business trip, or tag personal jurisdiction. And so that key phrase there, which is no more than a few words, is going to help me remember the elements of physical presence, right? Because I'll recall, oh, that's right, that man was physically present in the forum state and the attorney handed him the lawsuit. So what are the elements of physical presence? It's voluntarily physically present in the forum state and personally served with process. And so associating facts to rules that you've seen before will also help you memorize. Another thing that I encourage you all to do at this point in your studying, you should absolutely be doing closed book timed essays. Okay, so when you do those, obviously you're going 100 miles an hour and you're typing out your rules the best you can, you're applying, you're doing your IRACs, you're concluding, etc. When you go back to grade your essays, obviously you're grading them for accuracy, application, conclusion, good format, but you also want to take particular care to look at your rule statement as you wrote it, right, from the heart, based on your memory, and you want to audit that rule statement against your outline. And whatever the rule statement that you wrote in the heat of battle, if you will, and whatever it's missing as compared to the study materials that you're going to use that you're using for crunching, you want to fill in those missing words in red in your rule statement, okay? And then what I would encourage you to do is make another Word document where you have headings for each subject. So you would have one heading that is criminal procedure, one that is civil procedure, torts, property, contracts, and so on. And under the corresponding subject, you want to put in that rule that you did from memory in your essay, okay? And you want to essentially just copy paste it. And so that rule now will sit there mostly in black, but with some red, some writing in red. And the writing in red will be what you failed to recall the last time that you had to do so under time constraints. And so as you build that sheet of rule statements, it's not going to be comprehensive, but it should be on the most commonly tested topics, which tend to come up in essays. And in essays is where you really need to recall the rule in detail and be able to regurgitate it. So you can review this sheet that you're making every few days, and you're paying special attention to the words in red. Why? Because everything in black you've already successfully recalled in the past. So the odds are that if you're just giving it a quick read, you will be able to recall it again in the future, right? It's harder to remember than it is to forget, right? And so what you're going to focus on is the letters in the words in red, right? You're going to pay special attention to that because that's something that you are still failing to recall and that you need to focus on when you're memorizing. So I think that is a good idea as far as, again, we're trying to reduce the amount of information that we need to crunch. There's already an amount of information for everyone. Some people may be more, some people may be less, that you've already memorized, even without knowing it, right? But there's also information that you still haven't. And so you want to focus in on that information that you have not yet recalled, or I'm sorry, been able to memorize and recall. So that being said, how do you work on, being able to memorize? Well, just saying things out loud sometimes might not work. So here are three main things that I think you guys can do to help you just purely crunch and memorize. The first one is practice writing out the rules by hand. I'm not typically someone who writes things out by hand because it's a bit time consuming, but I have found the writing out by hand process to be better in memorizing. So that might be tedious, it might slow you down, but it'll help you. So if you feel like you're in a time constraint to do that you don't have the ability to do that for all the rules, then do it for the rules that you know are commonly tested and that you're struggling with, okay? So not all rules are created and tested equal on the bar exam, especially on the essays. So hedge your bets a little bit. Don't ignore the other rules, but do hedge your bets. The second one is practice typing the rules out. So after you've written them out, type them out as well. So you're getting your body used to writing out, typing out, etc. So you're doing it in different methods. And lastly, I would say use different places to the extent that you can for memorizing different rules. So maybe you'll practice memorizing all of your Crim Pro in your kitchen. You'll practice memorizing all of your civil procedure in your room. You'll practice memorizing property outside. And that association of being in a different space for different sets of rules does create a level of memorization, because then it's not all in your head as part of something that you practiced in the same space, right? And so the differentiation will actually make it easier for you to memorize. I think that's a good use of your time. And also, I would say make boilerplate terms for the non-essential part of the rule statement. So for example, you could say under the rules of federal civil procedure, under the rules of evidence, under the rules of civil procedure evidence, what was that I just said? Criminal procedure, under the rules of real property. And so you essentially have your lead off sentence, right, for the rule statement. And something that I would say is use a trigger word in your rule statement that is going to transition from the boilerplate, because you have to write this in an essay format, to the actual substantive rules for which you're going to be picking up points in your rule statement. And so typically what I would say is something like personal jurisdiction is obtained when a person is entitled to Miranda rights when, or a person has an easement interest in property when. And so the when is a signal to the grader and to myself, hey, here comes the substantive part of the rule statement, right? The indispensable part of the rule statement that we can't go without and that points are allocated for. And also, if you build boilerplates, it again reduces the amount of information that you have to memorize. And I would say standardize these as much as you can by using these boilerplate terms across all subjects, right? You can always use the word under the, or this happens when, right? And this will reduce the amount of information that you have to memorize, and it'll make it easier to crunch the rules that you actually do need to know. So again, I kind of hit on this unofficially, but I do want to restate this, is prioritize memorizing the rules that are commonly tested, and also the ones that you've noticed within commonly tested rules that you're struggling to remember, okay? Not everything is created equal. Are you going to get an essay that is testing a rule out of left field that has not been tested in 10 years? Absolutely. But, excuse me, the likelihood of that happening will be one or two questions within an essay, or within a couple of essays, right? So you're talking about 6 essays. They usually have 3 to 4 questions. So 6 times 3 roughly is between 18 and 24 questions, right? That you're going to get out of all the essays. 3 or 4 of them might be something that is completely out of left field. The remaining amount are probably going to be rules that have been known to be highly tested or medium tested. And so the more that you put forth memorizing those rules will be important for memorizing for the essays. For the MBEs, the same concept applies. I mean, there are rules that are tested more often, but not as much as in the essay portion. But again, it goes back to hedging your bets. You only need, depending on what state you're in, between 65 and 72% of the material to pass the bar exam. You don't need to be a guru on everything. So don't try to be, because that's an inefficient way of studying. For the less frequently tested rules that you do have to memorize for your MBE, I would say, again, revert back to the essential element practice, right? Where like, what is the absolute thing that I need for this rule to memorize it, and try to and focus on memorizing that first. And once you have, if you still have time to memorize more, then you build on that knowledge, okay? And lastly, this really can't be understated. It's focus on relaxing the evening of before the exam, okay? And also the morning of. Now, that being said, I know that some of you will wind up crunching rules until the 11th hour, until you put yourselves to sleep the evening of, and you'll go into the test on a few hours of sleep, because the anxiety will just carry you that way. If that's the case, I mean, it is what it is. But you should still make a very conscious effort to shut it down at some point the evening before the exam. This is important because you want your brain to kind of sit on these rules, and you want it to be rested before you have to recall them the next 2 days, okay? And how do you do that? All of you should know by now what it is that you can do that will basically mentally unplug you, right? Whether it's having a glass of wine, watching some, maybe not as in-depth Netflix documentaries, or doing something that you feel like won't be as thought-provoking, that will help your brain mellow out and stay busy until it's time to go to sleep and get ready for the next day. Maybe have some sleepy time tea, etc. Whatever it is, but get yourself as best as you can in a situation where you are letting your brain relax, at least the evening before the exam. Because at that point, any memorizing you're trying to do, you're not actually memorizing, you're just keeping yourself busy. Okay, so all of that being said, these are tips that I know will help you all memorize, and that will make your memorizing process more efficiently. If any of you guys have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we wish you the best of luck as you take the bar exam. Take care.